What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Rage, back with another Outriders WorldSlayer video to bring to you, and today we're going to be covering what we believe is the most meta Devastator build and being able to use it and put it into our build theory kind of videos. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because this is one of the main builds that actually gets used when you actually become a Devastator or you choose to be a Devastator in this game, and this is pretty much what everyone kind of gravitates towards. So the best thing to do is kind of show what this actually means for the majority of people, how this is actually going to play out, and be able to see how this build's actually going to benefit from WorldSlayer and basically what we actually already know. So before we get into it, make sure you have dropped a like and a subscribe. It really does help the channel out, and let's get right into it. Alright, so the first thing that we always like to do and be able to cover is the fact that we like to cover the build. So the main build that you're actually going to be seeing, or the one that I've tried to stick as close to as possible, you're going to see up on the screen right now. Now, my build is slightly different by only one mod, and then the reason why is that is because I can't get anything to drop with bloody boost, so therefore I've gone for the one where you activate your skills. It actually causes anomaly damage. Now, you can actually interchange that, and you'll see on the screen they actually does mention that in the description, but this build is basically been put together by Halfwit over on the official Outriders Discord, so make sure you go over there, say hello, make him, thank him so much for the build that he does. But this is the main one that gets recommended to all the anyone that's looking for a top tier kind of like Devastator build. It's the easiest one to be able to play. It's got so much survivability, it does so much damage, and basically this is the main one that you actually want to be able to play around with. So let's get into it. Let's have a bit of a deep dive into it and find out what makes it so good. So the main thing that we're looking at is the 3-piece when it comes to the Seismic Commanders set. So obviously this is like a standard, offers a plus 50% to damage to enemies that are bleeding. So already we're off to a great start because that is such a good set. And it's a shame that the other sets for the Devastator don't really match this, but I do think the Seismic Commander set is probably one of the top 3 sets that's actually probably in the game. Now, the reason why we've gone for, as you can see on the skill tree, is going all the way across to the right to be able to increase the main damage for our earthquakes and basically all of our seismic skills. But the main things you want to be able to notice are actually fairly near the start, where we actually go up and down. So at the top we've got Strong Armor, the Anomaly, to be able to increase our resistance pierce. So obviously when we actually do our melee attack, depending on how many enemies we've actually hit with that, increases our resistance pierce to be able to obviously allow our anomaly power skills to be able to deal more damage. Now, the other thing that's really important with that is the fact that we do have a mod on our gear, which is Unstoppable Force, which increases our anomaly power by 50% of our resistance piercing. So therefore we're actually getting a double bonus when it comes to that node. Now, the other one to be able to pay attention to is the Paladin node, which is at the bottom, which means that every single time we activate our Reflect Bullets, therefore we get I think it's a 45% increase to our anomaly power. So that as standard is absolutely huge, which allows our skills to be able to hit even harder. Now, the main thing that obviously when it comes to this interaction, if you live under a rock or maybe you actually you weren't aware of this, is the fact that Reflect Bullets, when it's activated, you can cancel it straight away to be able to refund up to 90% of your cooldown. So therefore what you can do with this is be able to activate it again straight away. And that means that you're actually getting it back pretty much within the next second or two to be able to almost have a 100% uptime when it comes to that additional anomaly power that's actually coming your way. So that's pretty much it for the skill tree. Everything else is fairly standard. Obviously, it's a bottom tree all the way to the end, and it's basically a bleed build because it's anomaly power as well. Now, the other things to be able to note are obviously we're increasing our Earthquake through the use of mods to be able to obviously deal as much damage as possible. So we do have things like Bloodshock to be able to inflict bleed on enemies that get hit by the skill. We have Earth's Legacy to be able to increase the distance that you can actually go basically reach. We have Second Quake and Extra Quake to be able to make it so we can actually do 3 Earthquakes in one rotation or one cooldown. And we have Ground Crush to be able to increase the the damage that it deals instead of just as standard. The main other thing to be able to notice is that we do have Despair, and that means that Gravity Leap allows us to be able to, when we hit enemies with Gravity Leap, we're able to apply a multiplier to our anomaly damage that they're all going to be receiving. Now, this does go well with mod damage, and it also goes well with obviously the skill damage. The last thing is to be able to cover our Tainted Blood, which gives us another 25% damage to enemies that are afflicted with bleed, and we do have Captain Hunter to increase our damage to elites by 25% as well. Now, when it comes to the actual gear and it comes to the weapons, I tend to stick with the same two primaries, but also the pistol is where it kind of like comes into it. So while Halfwit has gone for a pistol that has Claymore Torrent and Death Chains, I did actually opt to go for something slightly different, to be able to go for Fortress as well as Strings of Gorse. Now, Fortress itself is kind of on the nerf side. It's definitely nowhere near what it used to actually be, but it can actually be kind of useful, one for a little bit of survivability, which granted the Devastator doesn't need much of, but the additional 30% damage that you can actually get from that can be quite nice to be able to obviously push your Earthquakes up into the million points of damage as long as you get the rotation right. So that's the way I've gone for it, and Strings of Gorse is just quite nice to be able to help deal with like a bunch of enemies nearby, but I guess Claymore Torrent is definitely like the more kind of like viable of the two, but Fortress was the one I swapped onto it, so you know, that's just how I went with it. So without further ado, let's get straight into the packs trees. Now, as always, like we've already covered, the Devastator, when it comes to their packs trees, the top one is purely for firepower builds, and the bottom tree is always for anomaly power builds. So therefore, we don't want to deal with anything to do with the Wrecker tree, so therefore we're going to look straight into the bottom tree. So obviously the first point that we have to pick up is Impact Point, where our seismic and kinetic skill damage is increased by an additional 50% of our anomaly power, and bonus damage is split amongst all damaged enemies. This is just going to give us a nice kind of like little boost to our Earthquake. That's about it really. Oh, it also affects our Gravity Leap as well, but we don't spec into Gravity Leap to be able to deal with damage. It is primarily for our Earthquake, so we're just going to see a nice little bit of damage, depending on how many enemies we do actually hit with our Earthquake. Depends on how much of the additional damage we're actually going to see there, but either way, it's an additional boost to our anomaly power, or in terms of our seismic skills. So therefore, every single boost is a good boost. So therefore, we're actually dealing more damage. When it comes to the next skill, we have Puncture, which your seismic skills inflict bleed, and anomaly damage to enemies afflicted with bleed is increased by 15%. And the other one we can go for is Obliteration, where it increases your anomaly power and resistance piercing by 5%. And each damaged enemy increases the bonus by 5% up to an additional 15% for 2 seconds. So the main one to be able to go for, I feel, with this one is Puncture. Now, the Obliteration does sound great, and you know, Obliteration on paper probably sounds like it's going to provide us more damage, it's going to provide us a bit more resistance piercing, which then goes straight into our anomaly power, etc, etc. On paper, that sounds absolutely amazing. The main thing to be able to take away from this, and why I think Puncture is better, is one, because it's given us a flat damage multiplier to enemies afflicted by bleed, so we're increasing the main thing that we're actually doing with our build even further. But the main thing to be able to say is that top part where your seismic skills inflict bleed. This, because that's being there, we can take away one of our armor mods on our build, and then actually replace it with something else that can actually be more beneficial, something that can give us more anomaly power, something that can give us an additional damage multiplier. You know, we can now have Bloody Boost and the skill that activates to be able to give it, like, deal anomaly damage to nearby enemies. We can run both of those, and we don't have to worry about a flex spot. We can run additional mods. We can put something into Gravity Leap to be able to make it so it deals damage. The possibilities are kind of endless in that kind of sense. So therefore, because it frees up a mod slot, and because it also gives us some additional damage, I do think that Puncture is the best way to be able to go for this, and I just think this is a really good skill overall to be able to obviously pick up, because just inflicting bleed as standard to be able to, like, to as many enemies as possible, obviously then plays so well into the set bonus. Yeah, it's definitely going to be one of the better ones to be able to go for with that. Next up, we have Earthen Shell, which once again, just damage dealt with skills is converted to shield. It just gives us a little bit of extra survivability. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't help the build in any kind of way. So now we come on to the next bit, and this is once again this kind of helps out a little bit to be able to go for similar to what we did with Vlad. So what we have is Upheaval, where enemies damaged by seismic skills become upheaved for 5 seconds, storing 50% of damage received during that time and releasing it once the effect ends. And we also have Multi-Strike, where 30% of the damage dealt by a seismic skill is stored and added to your next seismic skill. The effect resets every time you release your stored damage. So with Upheaval, most of the time you are actually killing the enemy before that 5 seconds actually comes due. So therefore, I don't actually think, unless we're actually just dealing with Elite, I don't think Upheaval is actually going to be that important. Most of the time with, as you'll see in the footage in the background, the rotation that's actually with this LEAPQUAKE build is the fact that it's just able to decimate everything so quickly, because as long as you're holding out your pistols, you can activate all your earthquakes within less than a second. Because of all the debuffs that we're applying, because of the additional like anomaly power that we're actually getting, it's kind of like a no contest. There's not many things that are actually going to survive 5 seconds in front of you. So therefore, I don't think Upheaval's really going to be the main way to be able to go for this. Or at least I don't think it's going to be offering much. Like I said, when it comes to like bosses and elites, maybe it'll do something then. But as it currently stands, I don't think that's really going to help out too much. Now, multi-strike on the other hand means that we can actually deal quite a bit of additional damage every other earthquake. So it says it stores 30% of damage dealt by the seismic skill, and it then gets added to your next seismic skill. The main thing that I want to take away from this, and the main thing I actually want to test for when this actually does come out, is the fact that, is that going to apply to every single enemy that we actually do impact with this, or is it just going to apply to one enemy that we actually gets hit? So does it stack up, like as one skill activation, and we hit, say, 5 enemies, are we actually going to take all 5 of those damage numbers and then take 30% of that to then put straight back into our skill? Because if so, this means that Earthquake is going to be hitting ridiculous numbers the more enemies you're actually hitting. So this could be a really nice way to be able to increase Earthquake in terms of its DPS, and that's something that I'm interested in trying out when it comes to it. The other way you can go with this is Richter Rising, where enemies damaged by both seismic and kinetic skills within 4 seconds receive 30% more damage for 4 seconds. So things like your Earthquake and things like your Gravity Leap are actually going to be able to inflict an additional 30% damage, kind of like a modifier or multiplier to your follow-up damage. So therefore, it's a really nice way to be able to stack that up. I do think Richter Rising is definitely better than Upheaval in that sense. But when it comes to energy transmission, each enemy damaged by your kinetic skill increases the damage of your next seismic skill by 10%, and each enemy damaged by your seismic skill reduces ongoing cooldowns of your kinetic skills by 1 second. Now, I don't necessarily think this is going to be the way to go with this build, and the reason why is because we don't have anything to be able to maximize the amount of enemies we can actually hit with our Gravity Leap. So unless we're actually catching some enemies off of spawn, but unfortunately with Gravity Leap being a targeted skill, it's kind of difficult to be able to get that timing right. It's kind of difficult to be able to suggest that this would be the better way to go, because obviously there's nothing like Endless Mass to be able to gather up the enemies to maximize the amount of damage or the amount of enemies that you can actually hit in one skill cooldown. Whereas Earthquake as itself would be a really good way to be able to get your Gravity Leap back off cooldown. I just don't see the damage side of things actually being really good, like being worth it in that sense. So therefore, I don't necessarily think this is going to be the best way to be able to go. I will definitely happily try and test this out once WorldSlayer does actually drop. I will happily go through this and be able to see the pros and cons for both sides. But if you're looking purely from a DPS kind of standpoint, I don't think energy transmission, and I don't think the middle tree is actually going to help you out too much. So I do think that means we're actually going to have to go for multi-strike, and I do think multi-strike will offer us more of a DPS boost than the middle tree actually will do. And lastly, we've got the Ascension trees. Now, obviously, this is going to be very similar to every single other anomaly power build that we've actually seen so far, which means that we're going to go straight for that anomaly tree in the top left corner. So that means we're going to be grabbing anomaly power, we're going to be grabbing resistance piercing, and we're going to be grabbing anomaly damage. Once again, because we actually do have unstoppable force in this build, I would highly recommend that you pick up resistance pierce first, and then go into anomaly power, and then go into anomaly damage, just because I think that's the most efficient way to be able to actually get anomaly power and to be able to deal most damage within the first 10 levels, and then 20 levels, and then obviously 30 levels. After that, feel free to grab other things like damage to enemy, damage to elites, or maybe a little bit of armor, maybe a little bit of health, or maybe even some health regen, just to be able to keep yourself alive. But those are the 3 main ones to be able to maximize your DPS as quickly as possible. And once again, just a reminder that obviously with Ascension points, you can reset these as many times as you want, so feel free to have a mess about with this. If you're finding that resistance pierce is just not offering you enough straight away, feel free to reset and go straight into anomaly power and just see if the damage numbers are actually comparable that way. So that pretty much wraps up this video. I hope you've learned something useful with ourselves. If you did, make sure you drop a like and a subscribe. We'll be doing more build theory videos leading all the way up to WorldSlayer, and as soon as WorldSlayer does actually drop, we'll be doing loads of build videos coming your way, because there's a lot of stuff to be able to go through, and I'm very interested and very hyped to be able to actually get back onto build videos once again, as we actually did when we first started out about a year ago. So massive thank you for making your way to the end of this video. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family, as always, for their continued support. It really does mean the world to us. And that just leaves me to say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.